The upcoming U.S. presidential election is once again provoking arguments from liberals about the lesser evil, amid widespread concern about the reactionary right. Revolutionary socialists never support capitalist parties or their candidates, our class enemies, and we reject lesser evilism as a justification for doing so, even when the lesser evil isn't complicit in genocide, which, to be fair, it usually is. If we're going to be honest, that's the thing about Gaza is like it's not that this is. I mean, maybe it is with the worst thing ever. I don't know. It's not that different, I guess, from other genocides and other mass killings in the past. But that's the thing is like, well, it's not that it's that different. It's that we can fucking see it now, and we should be realizing, oh, this is how the system works. This is how the machine we feed the machine, and it's horrendous, and that's why we're fucking Marxists. Yeah, let's drive this home. Revolutionary socialists never support capitalist parties or their candidates, our class enemies. And we reject lesser evilism as a justification for doing so, even when the lesser evil isn't complicit in genocide. Here, we outline the history of this fundamental Marxist principle. And this is an interesting history. Like, I encourage you to look further into this beyond the article. And this is Firebrand, by the way. They're an offshoot of the International Socialist Organization, the ISO. And I guess that org kind of broke up, just dissolved for whatever reason. And Firebrand is, formation of some of their previous chapters. Okay. Joe Biden's withdrawal from the presidential race and the candidacy of Kamala Harris has changed the character of the coming election. Instead of just another in the endless, monotonous slog of election cycles, with the same two candidates reprising the previous contest, this election now has an air of excitement to it. Suddenly, the Democratic Party is actually interested in campaigning. And now this was my point, and it was, the point of the larger left as well. I think is that, you know, like if the Democratic Party wants to have a chance of winning, they got to drop Joe Biden, and just doing that, just having a different candidate, even if it was someone else than Kamala, was going to excite the base. It just was like that. There was no question of that, and that's exactly what happened. And I also would add to that, and I think many did. Giving it to Kamala was a good idea too, because people had already voted for her as the vice president, even though she didn't get any votes in the primaries. But yeah, she was part of the ticket that people were voting for. So just fucking put her up. Like that's people are going to be excited because again, not Joe Biden, not dying. She's right. She's like 60, maybe about to or just turned 60, which is young in American politics. We knew that was going to happen. But now the problem is like they have an upper ceiling because they're refusing to change course on not only Israel, but kind of everything. All right, this new situation provides both an opportunity and a challenge for revolutionary socialists in testing our approach to electoral politics. Our view of elections is not the same as those of liberals or progressives, in which individual voters express their politics by choosing between the available options. True, but and it's going to get into this, but we need to add to the available options. Socialist politics are necessarily a collective effort struggling together to free humanity from oppression and exploitation. We therefore have to make all our strategic decisions collectively and then implement them with the aim of winning liberation. This is what I'm talking about, is getting more organized and deciding as a movement, as an organization, as a party, are we going to run candidates? How many? For, how many positions? Should we withhold a vote from the Democrats and then give it if they do X, Y, and Z? Again, I think we need to add to the list of available options, but I'm one guy. We need to do this collectively. This is the first of a two-part argument about the upcoming election. Part one will place the current election in the context of Marxist politics. The next part will address some frequent objections to the conclusions drawn here. All right, you got to make a distinction. A key component of revolutionary working class politics is consistently supporting the working class in opposition to the capitalist class. We cannot build up one side by giving our support to the other. Fred Hampton once said. Now, if you don't know Fred Hampton and the Black Panther Party, you got to fucking read up on them. They are the hands down the best revolutionary socialist movement we have ever had in the United States. The old Socialist Party was pretty good too, but Black Panthers, man, they did so much. All right, so Fred Hampton said, "But when I leave, you can remember I said, with the last words on my lips, that I am a revolutionary, and you're going to have to keep on saying that. You're going to have to say that I am a proletarian. I am the people. I am not the pig. You've got to make a distinction, and the people are going to have to attack the pig. The people are going to have to stand up against the pig." I love the "I'm the people, I'm not the pig." There's a rap artist named Rebel Diaz did a remix, or he sampled "Which Side Are You On" from the old Union song, and did this awesome, like, there's a couple of features on it too, like it's so good. And there's one verse, one of the guys ends it with "I am the people, not the pig. I repeat after Fred, so please blow my brains out if I ever forget." It's so good, man.
I am the people, not the pig. I repeat after Fred, so please blow my brains out if I ever forget.
Not long after delivering this speech, Hampton was assassinated in a coordinated effort between the Nixon administration, the Chicago Police Department, and the FBI. A brief thought experiment seems appropriate. Imagine a ballot with 3 candidates: Fred Hampton of the Black Panther Party, the Chicago Police Department, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. In this election, it should be a no-brainer for socialists to support and vote for Hampton and the Panthers. But what if there were only 2 candidates on the ballot? Would socialists endorse the CPD or the FBI? Those 2 organizations are certainly not the same, and arguments could conceivably be made that one or the other is less harmful. However, they're obviously both part of the repressive apparatus of the capitalist state, and we as socialists have to make a distinction. Foundations of a Marxist approach to elections. In their 1850 address, so remember 1850 here, because this is like a little outdated, and they do get into like, okay, what did Lenin say about this fucking 75 years later, so yeah, just come along for the ride here. In their 1850 address of the Central Committee to the Communist League, Marx and Engels, writing in the aftermath of the revolutions of 1848, take up the question of political organization and elections, particularly in the context of the rise to power of the German bourgeoisie. Yeah, this is kind of, I believe the like mid 19th century is when you really started to have a German state that was unified as a republic and not a not like scattered kingdoms and shit, yeah, a lot of modern states are like younger than we realize. Even though the civilizations of Europe are so old, it's very weird. They acknowledge that the working class is not the only class oppressed by the state. The petty bourgeois and the peasantry are likewise in opposition. So the question of who to run in elections and who, if anyone, to join forces with is an important one. Marx and Engels argue that workers' candidates must be nominated everywhere in opposition to bourgeois democratic candidates. As far as possible, they should be League members, and their election... See, this is why we need a fucking organization that's big enough. PSL. Join PSL. And their election should be pursued by all possible means. Even when there is no prospect of achieving their election, The workers must put up their own candidates to preserve their independence, to gauge their own strength, and to bring their revolutionary position and party standpoint to public attention. And we do need to do that. I don't think the Green Party is I don't think of them as a working class party, and I don't think of them as a socialist party. I think that because of that, and yeah, just being unorganized, they don't do a great job of this. I think PSL is off to a good start. I think, hopefully we can get better at that. The goal of getting workers' candidates elected is certainly there, but this is back to the article now. But the point is that elections can also serve as an opportunity to present socialist politics to broader layers of the working class. This is also why we need socialists running for everything, not just president, and to gauge what kind of support exists for them. You'll notice that Marx and Engels are not concerned here with, quote, splitting the vote by undermining a bourgeois democratic candidate and leaving the door open for something worse. The focus is on building working class politics and organization through elections. Because that's the thing. If we do that, and this bears out in history, if we do this organization, we can beat the capitalist interests regardless if it's the worse one or not. Just what exactly something worse might look like became clear when Lenin and the Bolsheviks took up these basics decades later. In the 1906 elections to the Duma, that's their, Russian parliament, Russian Marxists had to decide how to address the threat of the violently ultranationalist Tsarist group, the Black Hundreds. The Mensheviks, the Bolsheviks' more moderate Marxist rivals, argued that Marxists should form electoral alliances with liberal groups, specifically the Cadets, a liberal monarchist party, to keep the Hundreds out of the Duma. I'm going to read that again. The Mensheviks argued that Marxists should form electoral alliances with liberal groups, specifically the Cadets, a liberal monarchist party, to keep the Hundreds, that's the far right, that's the far right, out of the Duma. So go ask France how that worked out a couple weeks ago. Go ask Germany how that worked out in 1933. Liberals will betray you.
Don't trust the liberals. They will betray you.
They're going to betray us. And they do, and they are. We know this. This would have entailed supporting cadet candidates and avoiding splitting the vote by fielding candidates in opposition to the cadets. Lenin identified 3 problems with this approach. Firstly, would this alliance have actually reduced the danger of the Black Hundreds? Despite their differing politics, both the Hundreds and the Cadets recognized the authority of the Tsar and the legitimacy of the Tsarist state. And that's a problem because the goals of socialism are not compatible with the Tsarist state, and they're not compatible with the modern neoliberal state. With the Hundreds frequently waging bloody anti-Jewish pogroms, right, so that's the far right doing anti-Jewish pogroms, with either the tacit or explicit approval of the Tsar, it would have been foolish to expect the Cadets to consistently and directly oppose the Hundreds. Right? Because approval of the Tsar. And they respect the authority and legitimacy of the Tsarist state. They recognized it. Making an electoral alliance would have sent the message to the working class that the Cadets could actually be trusted. And they couldn't. And neither could the German Socialist, Social Democratic Party, and neither did the French fucking center right party, the Macron's party. If you don't know what I'm talking about, by the way, there was an election in France. There was a parliamentary, national election in France recently, and it was close. But there's a new leftist coalition, as well as a center right coalition, and then there's a far right party. So the left coalition got the most votes, but not an overwhelming majority. But an unmistakable plurality. So there's that. So this put Macron in an interesting position where He's the president of France. They have a president and a prime minister in the parliament, and the president names the prime minister. Now, I believe if you have the majority, 50+%, then he probably has to name the prime minister candidate from that winning party. Technically, I guess he doesn't have to do that if it's just a plurality. But if you respected your fucking voters, and if you, actually wanted to stop fascism and weren't just an anti-left, anti-socialist corporate mouthpiece, you would name the leftist coalition's prime minister candidate. He didn't do that. He named the far right party's candidate. Okay? So not his party, not his coalition that got the second most votes. The far right party, which got way, way fewer votes. Okay? So that's why you can't trust liberals. It would have been misleading the working class movement. Second problem is that this would have effectively surrendered the leadership of the movement to the cadets. The cadets were certainly going to be running their candidates, regardless of what the Marxists did. So avoiding splitting the vote would, in practice, have entailed Marxists standing down and endorsing cadet candidates. Which, it's scary to walk away, but we got to cut ties at some point. Because otherwise we're just doing that. We're standing down. Having acquired the support of the political forces to their left, the cadets would have been able to masquerade as the voice of the working class and oppressed. And this is what the Democratic Party does in the U.S. Now, in the 1950s, I think it was the 50s, maybe 40s, maybe a little earlier, there was a law created that union leadership had to sign an oath of anti-communism. Sign an oath that you're not a communist or socialist if you're a leader in a union. There's no anti-fascist pledge, by the way. So there's that. So the Democrats post FDR, when and especially like post LBJ, like started to move to the right on labor issues. They absorbed the labor movement and continued to absorb popular movements. Right, the Democratic Party is often called the graveyard of activist movements or radical politics. This is what happened with BLM. They're doing this with like calling for a ceasefire, right? That's all bullshit, but now they have co-opted that. They co-opted Bernie Sanders. You know what I mean? Like all of this gets rolled in to the big tent, and that's it. These things have nowhere to go on their own. Another one, the Minnesota Democratic Farmer Labor Party, because the Farmer Labor Party was a further left party than the Democrats that was trying to challenge Democrats. Democrats were able to absorb that into their movement. So, I'd say the Minnesota Democratic Party is one of the better, more left-leaning parties, Democratic parties throughout the U.S. And, that might be why, like, there's some good policy in Minnesota, like Tim Walz is the governor, but it still absorbed a working class movement, and it's not coming back. As Lenin wrote at the time, why should the cadets get to pretend to be Democrats, and this small d Democrats? Rather than taking the opportunity to put forward communist politics, the alliances favored by the Mensheviks would have ceded leadership and political influence to the cadets. And I'll point out, and a lot of people might argue with me and say, like, well, the Soviet Union was bad and it wasn't socialist or whatever. I don't think people realize how bad some of these places were before communism, and that these are very, very different places from here. So, like, yeah, maybe it doesn't look ideal to you, but it's actually pretty amazing the progress that, Soviet Union and Maoist China and Cuba and Vietnam and all these places made. And the U.S. and the West wouldn't have been invading and fighting communism so hard if it wasn't working, if it wasn't doing something, if it didn't have popular support. Okay. The last problem is that placing primary emphasis on the Duma elections as a strategy for opposing the Black Hundreds would itself have been a mistake and misunderstands the role of Parliament. True. Keeping proto-fascists out of office does not mean you have defeated them. Rather, they have to be defeated politically and in the streets by a mass working class movement. Absolutely. So, in was it Liverpool? It was somewhere in the fucking UK, where those riots were happening, those far right riots. In the days after, there were more far right rallies or riots planned, and people opposed to the fascists showed up in such great numbers that it couldn't happen. That's what you got to do. You got to fucking outnumber them and physically hold them back. Like, that's what we got to do. We need a working class movement to do that, and it's good that we're starting to see signs of it. Build on that. Lesser evilism. U.S. socialist Hal Draper took this approach into the late 20th century in his pamphlet, Who's Going to Be the Lesser Evil, in 1968. It's an enduring and decisive argument that deserves to be revisited in its entirety by socialists every election year. Draper begins with what he calls the classic case of lesser evilism, the appointment of Hitler to the position of chancellor in 1933 by President Hindenburg, the very person who had defeated him in the election. In this situation, again, this is now, and to be fair, like the Nazi Party did get a lot more votes in that election, in that parliamentary election, but this is roughly the same as what Macron just did, just completely caved to the far right. In this situation, we can see the proof of Lenin's argument regarding the Black Hundreds above. Not only did voting for a lesser evil not stop the rise of fascism, it didn't even slow it down. As Draper famously put it, the people voted for the lesser evil and got both. The U.S. in 1967 was a very different situation than Germany in 1932, of course, but this is exactly the point. Germany was facing a social crisis the existing government had no way to resolve, and the choice in the immediate term was revolution or fascism. These are the highest stakes imaginable, but even here, falling back and voting for a conservative to fight back fascism didn't work. So why, in 2024, when the threat of an immediate fascist takeover of the state is not on the table, would the strategy be any more advisable? Germany was facing a social crisis the existing government had no way to resolve, and the choice in the immediate term was revolution or fascism. I'm not sure what they mean here. The threat of an immediate fascist takeover of the state is not on the table. I mean, it kind of is. It might be, but I agree, it's not more advisable. Draper gives the example of the 1964 election, in which people convinced themselves that Lyndon Johnson was the lesser evil as against Goldwater, who was going to do horrible things in Vietnam, like defoliating the jungle. Oh my God. You probably know what I'm going to say. I'm going to come back to this in a second. In reality, the liberal Johnson did exactly that, widely deploying Agent Orange and inflicting devastating damage to public health in Vietnam. The deadly herbicide continued to kill people for decades after the formal end of the war. This is fucking 1 to goddamn 1 with the current election in Gaza. Leftists watching, tell me, have you heard this from liberals? Horrible things in Vietnam. Can do horrible things. They'll say, well, Trump and the Republicans want to flatten Gaza. I'm like, bitch, it's flattened. They did that. So you're uninformed or you're in denial about what's actually fucking happening there. And I'm not impressed by either of those. If people have this mind about it, even after reading this, fine, vote for Kamala Harris, but don't fucking lie to me. Don't fucking tell me that, oh, but it would be even worse under Trump. It can't get worse. It is a genocide. The U.S. fully supports it, knowing what's going on, and nothing's going to be done by the fucking Democratic Party. And yeah, Republicans are going to be terrible. What are they going to do that the Democratic Party hasn't done? What are they going to do that the Democratic Party won't do if the Democratic Party wins this year? Some of Johnson's former supporters complained that he, quote, actually carried out Goldwater's policy, but this is actually unfair to Goldwater, who never proposed anything on the scale of Johnson's violence. And this is, again, not to, under no circumstances do you gotta hand it to Trump, but yeah, it's like people say, oh, Trump would be so much worse. And it's like, yeah, well, first of all, again, like I said, I don't see how it could get much worse. But like, even if it can, sure, maybe he might be worse. But like, the Democratic Party is making it worse right now. The Democratic Party is like been as bad as you can be on this all the way through, especially the president. And this is, God, all of this is the fucking same, dude. Draper attributes this to Johnson's ability to hypnotize the liberals with Great Society rhetoric, that is, holding up all of the progressive domestic reforms to cover for their continuing maintenance of empire and capital. And, I don't think Biden did much of this or Harris will do much of this, but they certainly talk about it like they are doing domestic reforms. Like, what they've had to offer us to keep us on board every step of the way has dwindled. Okay, so keep that in mind. You're getting less in return than you ever have for supporting the atrocities of your leaders. This classic liberal maneuver means that liberal supporters come into every election claiming that the fascists are coming and everyone needs to vote for the lesser evil. Democrats therefore know that they have the liberal vote in their back pocket and don't need to do anything to win it. Instead, what they do have to do is appease the forces to their right. And this again goes back to why I said the Soviet Union was a good thing. The existence of the Soviet Union was ultimately good. Whatever you fucking can say about it. Because the idea, the very concept of a successful socialist revolution scared the fucking shit out of Western neoliberal democracies. I don't think you get like FDR or LBJ, like domestic reforms, without the Soviet Union existing. No fucking way. Look what happened after it dissolved. Clinton, Obama, Biden, fuck off. Okay. Instead, what they do have to do is appease their forces to their right. This process has forced politics in the U.S. to move steadily right until even Lyndon Johnson could look like a lesser evil. Hopefully this sounds familiar. It didn't stop with the Johnson administration and hasn't stopped yet. While there are key differences between Draper's time and ours, supporting the lesser evil over multiple election cycles undercuts any ability for the left to actually fight the far right. Draper was writing in 1967 in the context of the post-war American economy, and he argues that both liberals and conservatives were at the time converging under bureaucratic, statified capitalism, the system of capitalism that existed in the U.S. at the time. He gives the example of Truman vetoing Taft-Hartley, an anti-union bill, and then invoking it against striking workers. Motherfucker. Liberals always have to make use of repressive measures that conservatives advocate. And conservatives at the time were forced to maintain the welfare state because that was what the maintenance of the system demanded. Soviet Union. No electoral choice on offer was in any way willing to challenge the established structure of the state. Commonalities. We can see the common shape of the revolutionary socialist approach to elections emerging from these writers. Each of them views the question as one for a revolutionary organization or for the entire movement, not for the individual. That's what we talked about early on. When we talk about voting in the U.S., framing of the discussion is often, who should I vote for? Or who should I feel bad about voting for? Or who can I stomach voting for? As though we're shopping for the least expired carton of milk in the supermarket. Socialists need to approach elections differently as a political event into which we seek to intervene collectively. We need to aim to make strategic decisions as a group. Thank you. God, it's so nice to fucking hear someone say this shit. Like, it's lonely being right all the time. Additionally, there's a focus in the revolutionary tradition on political dynamics on a much longer scale than one election cycle. Everyone on the left has, at one point or another, become frustrated with the mysterious amnesia that afflicts liberals every 2 to 4 years, enabling them to treat each election as a new crisis out of the blue, requiring new concessions every time. This is both a cause and effect of what Draper describes as politics moving right, right, right. If both lesser and greater evils are further to the right every election, it is necessary for liberals to forget what their own candidates from a few years ago said and did. If you watched the DNC speeches, you know what this is about. At the same time, this rightward march means that each cycle brings new horrors from the segments of the right that were not long ago completely outside the mainstream, to which liberals respond with their cries about impending fascism. Yeah, because they fucking end up embracing all of this shit. Like, dude, if you're a youngin', all right, you don't understand the fucking hate we all had for George W. Bush and Cheney, all right? And now liberals are touting the fact that the Cheney family are fucking gonna vote for Kamala Harris. They've endorsed Harris. Because, as Dick Cheney said, there's Trump is like a unique threat to democracy. Can't stress this enough. The Bush family stole the 2000 election, okay? And it's not even just the fucking Supreme Court shit. Why did it have to go to the Supreme Court? Because the Jeb Bush administration, when he was governor of Florida at the time, purged so many black Democrats from the voter rolls that people were unable to vote, and it made the election at one point too close to call. There was a recount underway, and then there was something called the Brooks Brothers riot, which I believe Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett and maybe one of the other Trump appointees, like Gorsuch or something, were involved in at the time, in their young adulthood. And it was orchestrated by Roger Stone. There was this Brooks Brothers riot that stopped the recount, and the election, or the Florida results, and therefore the election, was decided by the Supreme Court, which was fairly right-wing at the time, and they decided in favor of Bush. Now, since then, you can go look, and the popular vote is clear in Florida. It went to Gore. And then Gore, like a fucking wet blanket Democrat through and through, as vice president at the time, oversaw the Senate, the certification of the vote, right? So he oversaw that as president of the Senate, vice president of the U.S., and just let it fucking through. Because what was happening is there was a whole string of Congress people who were sounding the alarm. All right, so they are there at the Senate certification session, these House members bringing these concerns to Gore, saying they didn't finish the recount. There are these irregularities. There are these voter roll purges by Jeb Bush. All this shit. But here's the thing. Al Gore, again, wet blanket Democrat, a slave to process, did not entertain any of them, did not do anything to, fight this, because no senator would basically like affirm or attest to one of these complaints, one of these reports by the House members. So you need a senator to like rubber stamp it, or to, be like the faculty advisor for your high school club, which is why the Senate is a fucking undemocratic institution that needs to die. Figuratively, the institution needs to go away. All right, so that's what happened. There's a book that you should read called The Best Democracy Money Can Buy by Greg Palast, Palast. He did such fucking intricate investigative reporting on what happened in Florida. All right, I told you, voter rolls. Thousands of black people kicked off of voter rolls for dubious reasons because they maybe shared a name with like a felon from another state or some fucking bullshit like that. The black population in Florida, as in most of the U.S., tends to vote Democrat. And if you don't think Jeb Bush fucking knew that when he was purging these people from voter rolls, you're crazy. But that's what happened, all right? And then people are going to go, oh, fucking Ralph Nader. Shut up. Shut up. Shut the fuck up. No. All right? Every Democrat since 1992 has run against a Green Party candidate, okay? Clinton won twice. Obama won twice. Biden won, okay? So fuck off with the Green Party shit. Socialists need to take a longer view so we can understand the political and economic dynamics that shape society and plan our strategy accordingly. After all, Draper would never have been able to formulate his diagnosis of lesser evilism if he limited his observations to one election cycle. That said, socialists should view every election as a political opportunity to put forward our politics and win people to them. The guiding principle is to orient the working class towards confrontation with capitalism. As was the case with and that's what I love about this year, is that, you know, especially like the student intifada, like these kids are fucking great, dude. And there's been such a steady progression from, I'd say, the past 20 years, 21, 22 years, from the, early Iraq War protests to Occupy Wall Street to Black Lives Matter 2014 to Black Lives Matter 2020, and now to the pro-Palestine movement and the student intifada. The sophistication and the education has gotten so much better. Like, we have improved continuously. And these aren't even the same people, obviously, because we're talking about college students today who were not alive yet when the fucking Iraq War protests started in, maybe some of them were born in, 2002, 2003. It's their whole lifetimes, and they were babies when this started. And yet, because of the political education going on throughout all of it, and, this includes like the Bernie Sanders campaigns in 2016 and 2020, the rise of the DSA again, and now PSL, the sophistication has gotten so much better. The fact that they had like media liaisons and, just we're so well organized. I am really hoping that they keep the momentum up because kids are getting back to it now that school's back in session, and I want them to fucking tear it down, man. It's so good. It's so good. So we are, even though not everyone in that movement is like, principally anti-capitalist yet, and that's okay. Because necessarily what's happening is we are in confrontation with capitalism. That's my point. As was the case with Lenin versus the cadets, we can never afford to concede political leadership to the capitalist class, or worse, provide them with cover from the left. Minnesota, Democratic Farmer Labor Party. And it's the same mechanism with Harris naming Walz as the running mate, right? Because like I think that was supposed to appease like Bernie Sanders supporters, right? But we saw, like, I think a lot of us see through them, and a lot of us know that, like, Tim Walz, first of all, he's going to be the vice president. He's not going to fucking make decisions. But, like, yeah, no, you can't put a shiny object in front of us and make us forget about the genocide that you're making us fund. The capitalist state and the executive under neoliberalism. Our situation is different from 1967. For one thing, we no longer live under the system of statified capitalism described by Draper. That's interesting, because I would have said we do. So maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. Let's read it. That post-war boom, which constituted the longest period of growth and stability in the history of capitalism. Oh, I see what he's saying. So statified capitalism, meaning like there was a lot more state involvement in kind of boosting the working classes involvement and the benefit we got from the capitalist economy. So that's what he means by state of okay. Longest period of stability in the history of capitalism. It was the only time the U.S. had anything like a functioning welfare state due to economic expansion, and an established labor movement doesn't exist anymore. The economic crisis of the 1970s led the capitalist class to look for new solutions. And what it arrived at is neoliberalism. Rather than the fairly large form of capitalist state that compels liberals and conservatives alike to act to maintain it, neoliberalism introduced rampant privatization and financialization. Under neoliberalism, the US and other countries began hacking off parts of the state to sell to private enterprise. This is what happened in the former Soviet Union too, and it's why the US forced that to happen in some ways. And that's why you have a degenerate fucking mess of a state in Russia now, because it's just like it's Putin, an illegitimate president, surrounded by a bunch of fucking oligarchs who own all the main resources, furthering control of the market by financial institutions and weakening the ability of the state to intervene economically. At the same time, massive attacks on organized labor and shifts toward more casual and precarious forms of employment further weakened the working class. Yeah, this especially started under Nixon, and then skyrocketed under Reagan. Ideologically, neoliberalism is usually accompanied by rhetoric about small government and personal responsibility, such as Margaret Thatcher's famous statement, "There's no such thing as society." It's the dumbest fucking shit I've ever fucking heard. God, I hate her. But the day I get to hell, I'm punching her in the face. The idea here is that there isn't any large collectivity, only rational, self-interested individuals and the nuclear family. Everything should be privatized. Oh, this is good. Okay. But if there's no society, what is the function of the state? Thatcher, naturally, was lying. She and Ronald Reagan and the generations of neoliberal politicians who have followed them have had no actual interest in dismantling or shrinking the capitalist state. The question is, which pieces they wish to preserve. It's the cops and the military. It's the cops and the army and the navy and the Marx's conception of the state is that it is the means by which one class imposes its will on another. And, by the way, capitalists agree with that. They'll tell you they don't. They'll tell you Marxism was wrong, but they know that it's correct. They know that Marxism is an accurate analysis. So, because if you look into what they actually do, and not just the bullshit they say, they are acting on this being true. They're just the reverse. They're anti-Marxists. They're inverse Marxists. Capitalist state aims to stabilize and maintain profit extraction in the interests of the capitalist class as a whole. Despite all the privatization of neoliberalism, these repressive functions of the state persist and have indeed expanded. We can't have healthcare, but the army, the police, public banking institutions, and other state bodies continue to repress the working class and keep the boss's interests secure. Oh, hey. Thanks for joining on TikTok, y'all. We're reading an article called "Why Socialists Don't Vote for Our Enemies" from Firebrand. It's a socialist organization. The president serves as the captain of the capitalist state, and always has. This is both an extremely powerful position and extremely limited one that does not allow for experimentation or any but the most surface level reforms. The job of the president is to, and that's why, by the way, Democrats will always argue about the limitations of the presidency when it comes to, criticism from the left, because it's not really built to do that. I mean, you could, like FDR did a lot, but you can't do more than the surface level if you're an agent of capitalism. But when, Trump's in office or Reagan's in office or Bush is in office, they get fucking everything they want done because that's what our capitalist state is for. The job of the president is to maintain the neoliberal state, no more or less, just as it was to maintain the post-war bureaucratic state in Draper's era. Imagine our best, most politically unwavering and charismatic communist, say, for instance, this author. Okay, Mark J. If I were somehow elected to the presidency right now, in the absence of an extremely formidable mass working class movement, I would have the choice to either serve the interests of capital or to be quickly and probably violently removed. Yep. And this is what we did to Salvador Allende in Chile in 1973, September 11th, 1973. And the thing about him is, oh shit, stop. Thing about Salvador Allende, he did have a formidable mass working class movement. But he told his supporters to stand down because he believed that, oh, we could do this right. We can do, we can do this within the system. And no, because the U.S. came and got him. And Fidel Castro warned him about this. He said, you're going to have to lock down, dude, because that's the only way we've kept our revolution intact. Salvador Allende is just like, no, I'm democratically elected. We can do this right. We can do it within the state. We have seen this throughout history of capitalism, perhaps most clearly in the doomed presidency of Salvador Allende in Chile in 1973. Neoliberalism has been afflicted by crises of its own, especially after the global financial collapse of 2008. The credibility of governments worldwide has been severely damaged, contributing to the rise of the far right. The committed parties of neoliberalism, like the Democrats, are at a loss for ways to resolve these crises, and the far right is putting forward its solutions. True. This instability is no reason to fall back to supporting Democrats, however. If we are to make any headway under whatever economic order may supplant neoliberalism, we will need our political independence more than ever. Lesser evilism since Draper. The exploits of Democrats in their steady march right since Draper's essay could fill and have filled books. But to briefly recap, the Clinton administration destroyed such welfare as existed in the U.S. and decisively removed the idea of even basic responsibility toward the poor on the part of the government from official political respectability. These attacks on welfare were met with virtually no pushback from liberal organizations, as might have been expected had Reagan or George H.W. Bush attempted such a move. Clinton also imposed brutal sanctions on Iraq. In defense of this policy, Madeleine Albright famously claimed of the 500,000 Iraqi children who died by starvation, "We think the price is worth it." So if you don't think that the Palestinian death toll is going to get up there, because now we're hearing it could be or could get as high as 200,000, 400,000, because they are dying by starvation and disease now. Not just bombs and guns. She thinks the price was worth it. That fucking demon. After the widely reviled administration of George W. Bush, characterized by the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, and the expansion of the federal repressive apparatus, including the Patriot Act, Barack Obama took office on the crest of a wave of liberal optimistic fervor. It is easy to forget the degree to which liberals felt this was a decisive political and cultural shift in their favor. The anti-war movement, which had grown under Bush, very nearly disappeared, in no small part because major organizations believed Obama would end the wars and close the torture prison at Guantanamo Bay. And that's the thing. If you think the Democrat is more likely to do these things, then you need to fucking protest the goddamn Democrat. And stop complaining when people do that. If they're better, let them be better. Let them listen. But no, you're not supposed to fucking criticize them. Just vote for them and then they'll do it. No. He did neither of these things, and in fact expanded the so-called war on terror with a new fervor for drone bombing, the repressive powers of the Patriot Act, and the repression of social movements like Occupy. He also became known as the deporter-in-chief for his draconian policies toward his immigrants. But he did a DACA. We should remember that the Black Lives Matter movement and the Standing Rock Pipeline opposition originated under and were militarily attacked by the Obama administration. True. He called the BLM protesters thugs. The St. Louis protesters called them thugs. True to form, our most recent lesser evil, Joe Biden, has expanded many of the repressive measures of his predecessor, from attacks on anti-racist organizers to the maintenance of the U.S.'s southern concentration camps. They're talking about the ICE camps. He pleaded powerlessness as the right to abortion was overturned and preemptively broke a railroad strike, outlawing the strike before the authorization vote could even be held. In fairness, I will just add to that behind the scenes, Biden did get a deal with the railroad companies to do like a certain number of paid sick leave days. Oh, hey, woke CIA drone pilot. Hey, thanks for following, man. Appreciate you being here. We're reading Why Socialists Don't Vote for Our Enemies from Firebrand. Yeah, so he did get them some paid sick leave, so like fine, but like outlawing a strike, like fuck you. Like, get the fuck out. Like, that's just fucking disgusting. Say you support unions. Most importantly, he has continued the U.S.'s direct facilitation of the genocide in Palestine, which began in 1948 but reached horrifying new levels of mass violence in 2023 and 2024. In backing genocide, Biden has pushed the idea of lesser evil to its theoretical limits. Not for liberals, apparently. What is different with Harris? The nomination of Kamala Harris after Biden's decision to withdraw has changed the shape of the upcoming election. While lesser evilism has not changed at its core, the difference between the two Democrats and their approaches has thus far been striking. Perhaps most importantly for socialists in our work organizing face-to-face during an election year, we can expect much more enthusiasm from the Democratic base. Democrats finally have someone they actually want to campaign for now, in contrast to the grimmer, lesser evilism that was reluctantly mobilized to defend Biden. Appallingly, this will require Harris supporters to tacitly accept the genocide in Palestine. Oh, it's not tacit. We should also expect a renewed strength of pseudo-anti-oppression arguments to rally votes. The Democrats were already attempting this with various editorials and AstroTurf's social media presences. Hey, Custom Sea Glass, thank you so much. Yeah, woke CIA drone play. How is a fucking genocide a lesser evil? Right. It's like there is no limit to this, and that's why they say here that it's is pushing the idea to its theoretical limits. I don't think there is one, because that's what liberalism is going to do. It's always going to say and preach that the liberal party is the center, is the moderate, sensible area, no matter how far right everything goes. Democrats were already attempting this. AstroTurf social media claiming it was racist to demand Biden to step down. The argument being that all black people supported Biden, but they had, at best, limited success with this. Having lucked into a candidate who is, this is a little bit, I don't love that sentence structure, but having lucked into a candidate who's both black and a woman, the attempts to frame support for the Democratic candidate as not actually a lesser evil, but rather a progressive champion will only grow in strength. I don't think I agree with that. I'm going to be fair. Like, maybe some people are making like identity politics arguments, but like, to Harris's credit, she's not doing that. It's certainly not as cynically and shamelessly as Hillary Clinton, for one. So like, this is just like a little bit flippant to me. Yeah, I don't know if they're calling her a progressive champion either. I think Democrats are largely like, maybe I'm wrong, but I think largely Democrats are throwing out progressivism. They're saying like, no, like, we're the party of Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney. This is how it is, right? We're going to have the most lethal fighting force in the world. Already do, so I don't know what she's going to do there. Most lethal fighting force in the world, and chant USA at the fucking DNC. So I don't love that sentence, but that's okay. We must also, however, be prepared to oppose racist and sexist attacks on Harris from the right. Okay, so yeah. The worst reactionaries will attempt to mobilize on this basis and will no doubt see her nomination as an avenue for projecting their politics. Yeah, this is to be accepted under no circumstances. As much as we resolutely oppose Harris and the Democrats on principle, socialists have to fight racism and sexism everywhere it occurs. Yep. The campaign for Harris will capitalize on people's sense of relief at being rid of Biden. Now, again, we talked about this early on. The left was right about this. That alone gave a huge boost. The political impact of this is not to be underestimated. Despite nearly the entire Democratic apparatus supporting him well into the campaign, and Harris being the sitting vice president, the campaign appears to be revitalized from its moribund near acceptance of defeat only a couple of months ago. The weirdo GOP goblins who have moved from the darker fringes of the internet to the center of the Republican Party. Oh yeah, I wanted to say something about this earlier because it's also in media. Like this is another thing. I feel like I'm becoming old, but 20 years ago, Laura Ingraham, who is now on Fox News, she's a staple Fox News anchor. She was a talk radio person who was like so fringe. Like she was fucking nuts. Yeah, like just no one would touch that shit. And now she's just like a normal Fox News. Like it's insane. They appear to have no clear idea of how to deal with the Harris candidacy. They will probably get their shit together eventually, but for the time being, this has led to a very confident Democratic campaign. True. Yeah, I think, right. The article said earlier that the Democrats suddenly seem interested in campaigning. And I agree. Like, I think we forget, not to defend the Democratic Party in any way, really, but like, we forget just how bad the sort of like Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden era of the Democratic Party is. At just being, just inaction and just disdain for the public. So it's like, yeah, maybe we're back to they're at least trying to win, Lastly, Democrats will use Harris's record as a prosecutor as a selling point. It fits perfectly within the established Democratic messaging about how Donald Trump is a convict and the law and order shit that they've been on recently. For fucking 30 years, really. We have already seen her hammer a law and order narrative, there we go, in her remarks at the Democratic National Convention, establishing Trump as a criminal and Harris as the law. Tellingly, Harris makes use of this narrative to argue that she will be even tougher on border security than Trump. On the other hand, we should also expect the student intifada to be targets of this security mindedness, along with any other oppositional left-wing movement. Yeah, this is so threatening to the status quo order that they are giving up on. Joe Biden campaigning from his basement was fun. Yeah, it was awesome. Pro-socialist, Carter. But yeah, what I was saying is that student intifada and the pro-Palestine movement is so threatening to the current order of things that they've given up on an appearance of free speech. Now we're seeing just flat out brutality, like just brute force used against dissent. We expect them to be the targets of security mindedness along with any other oppositional left-wing movement, which, it has always been true, too. We were talking about Fred Hampton before, assassinated at 21. The socialist approach to the Harris campaign. We're almost done with this. Thanks for sticking around, if you have. So, does the candidacy of Kamala Harris present socialists with a situation in which we need to abandon our long-standing opposition to both parties of capital? In short, no. We have a very different political terrain in front of us than we did recently. But the renewed enthusiasm for the party of union busting, repression of protest, and genocide does not mean we should change our political orientation. Unlike those political currents that would see such a shift toward the Democrats as a call to turn to the right to gather easy supporters, we should see it as a confirmation of the importance of maintaining our political independence and only ever granting political support to the opponents of capitalism. I think it's time, guys. Like, we gotta vote. We gotta vote for socialists. The new confidence of the Harris campaign masks the chaos that led to it. Democratic Party has fumbled and bumbled its way to a candidate who is genuinely popular. This in no way addresses the actual problems faced by the working class, which persist across and between election years. This guy, Doug Green, is an author and socialist. I'm on a podcast with him called the Left Opposition Podcast, among others. And he always says something that's good to keep in mind, that when it comes to the Democratic Party, their losses are not our losses, and their victories are not our victories. It's important to keep that in mind. Again, even if you decide, no, I've got to vote for the lesser two, fine, do whatever you want. But like, understand that. Understand that that's not the struggle. That's just, you making what you see as a reasonable decision on who the president should be. And your vote doesn't count that much anyway, unfortunately, in the United States. We should keep in mind that for a lot of our audience, this is going to be a difficult concept to grasp. It was difficult for me. It took me a long time to get here, let alone act on, especially with the left as historically weak as it is. People aren't seeing convincing socialist candidates being put forward, or any socialist organizations capable of doing that. Again, PSL is doing it, but they're not big enough. They're not, powerful enough. So join PSL. Party for Socialism and Liberation, if you don't know. So it's our job to continue to build these organizations that I got to stop getting ahead of the article, so that we can begin to act in the electoral sphere and pose a reasonable alternative one day in the future. More importantly, we have to win people to the idea that an electoral campaign is not the ultimate expression of politics, nor even a primary battleground, and to convince them to work with us to build socialist movements, labor struggles, and revolutionary organizations that can fight back. To do this, we have to stand outside of the Democratic Party and in direct political opposition to it, not least when it has a popular candidate. And that's important because not only are the Democrats, not aligned with us, they are standing in the way of the destruction of the real demon, the Republican Party. Our long-term goal is the construction of a revolutionary party that can lead the struggle to overthrow capitalism. Every decision we make in the electoral arena must be in service of this goal. Kamala Harris is a former prosecutor and current cheerleader for genocide. We can expect that, should she win, her administration will be another in the long line of Democrats moving right. There's nothing to be won by the working class helping her get the job. The conclusion that all this should lead us to, and that we need to be prepared to argue for in an election year, is that we grant no support for any party of capital. We will not be supporting our oppressors, even if our candidates are not yet on the ballot. But they are. We do. I'm just I understand what they're saying. We do have one. Claudia de la Cruz, PSL. These are the principles that will best enable us to build a robust socialist left. Hell yeah. All right, there we go. what do they call it? The graveyard of